My mother demands I give both my kidneys to my golden child sister. My mother called me selfish for refusing to give both my kidneys to my sister Vanessa. She stood in the middle of my living room crying the kind of tears she could turn on like a faucet, telling me I was murdering my own sister by keeping organs I didn't deserve. You have 2 healthy kidneys and Vanessa has none. You could save her tonight if you weren't so heartless. Vanessa destroyed her kidneys drinking a bottle of vodka a day for 15 years. Started at 16, never slowed down. Mom bought her that first bottle. Said a young woman ought to learn to hold her liquor before some man taught her wrong. When the doctors warned her at 25 that her kidneys were failing, Mom said they were being dramatic. When she needed her first dialysis at 30, Mom blamed the doctors for not trying harder. Now at 32, both kidneys were dead. She needed a transplant or she'd die within a year. Mom's kidney wasn't a match. Dad's wasn't either, but mine were perfect. 1 kidney, I told her the first time she asked. I'll give her one. 1 isn't enough, she said. Her body is weak. She needs both to have a real chance. Then I'd be the one on dialysis forever. I'm 28. That's 50 years of a machine keeping me alive. You're stronger than Vanessa, Mom said. You could handle it. This was my mother in one sentence. Vanessa had been the golden child since the day she was born. She got a car at 16. I got a bus pass. She got 4 years of tuition she dropped out of halfway through. I got a loan I'm still paying. She got bailed out of 3 different holding cells. I got thrown out of the house at 18 for getting my girlfriend pregnant. That pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. Mom said I'd earned it for being careless. I became a nurse anyway. Worked 3 jobs to put myself through school. Built a whole life with 0 help from the family that forgot I existed until they wanted something from my body. For 10 years, Mom never called. Neither did Vanessa. I found out about family events through Facebook. Wasn't invited to Vanessa's wedding, Mom's 60th birthday, or Dad's retirement party. But now they needed my organs. So suddenly I was family again. The harassment started the day after I said no. Mom called my work and told them I was having a mental breakdown. Called my landlord and said I was unstable and dangerous. Called my girlfriend and told her I was a murderer who would let my own sister die rather than lift a finger. She showed up at my hospital during my shift, standing in the lobby pointing at me. Everyone look at the nurse who won't save his own sister. He has 2 kidneys and won't share even one. Security walked her out, but she came back the next day and the next. For 3 weeks she stalked me, calling, texting, showing up everywhere I went. Vanessa's dying because of you. You're selfish. What kind of brother watches his sister die? What she didn't know was that Vanessa wasn't dying. Not really. She was on dialysis 3 times a week. Uncomfortable, sure, but manageable. She could live for decades like that. I knew because I worked in the dialysis unit. I saw patients in their 70s who'd been hooked to machines for 20 years and still made their grandkids' birthday parties. Vanessa just didn't want the inconvenience. Neither did Mom. Mom wanted her perfect daughter back, not a daughter tethered to a machine 3 days a week. So she decided I should be the one tethered to the machine instead. I finally called Vanessa directly. Hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Do you know Mom's demanding both of my kidneys? I asked. Yeah, she said. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. So I'd be on dialysis for the rest of my life. You understand that, right? You're younger, she said. You'd adapt better. Plus, you don't even have kids to worry about. Neither do you, I said. But I might someday. You already had your shot at a family and lost it, she said. You couldn't even keep that. She actually said it. Reached across 2 years of silence to use the worst thing that ever happened to me as proof I didn't deserve working organs. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty and started getting ready to end this completely. I scheduled a meeting with Vanessa's transplant team, told them about the pressure Mom was putting on me, showed them the texts demanding both kidneys. The lead surgeon's face went flat. She wants you to donate both. That's not even legal. We would never approve that. Turns out Mom had been telling Vanessa the team would do it if I just agreed. A complete lie. Dr. Hale called Mom and Vanessa right there from her office. I put the phone on speaker so she could talk to both of them at once. Mom's voice came through sharp and furious, demanding to know why a doctor was interfering in family business. Dr. Hale stayed perfectly calm and explained that federal law prohibits living donors from giving both kidneys because it would require the donor to go on dialysis for the rest of their life. Mom's voice climbed an octave, insisting Dr. Hale was lying to protect the hospital from some imaginary lawsuit. I watched the surgeon's face stay professional and unbothered while my mother accused her of being bought off by the insurance companies. Dr. Hale repeated the facts slowly, the way you'd talk to a confused patient instead of a screaming woman. Living donors can only give 1 kidney. This is federal law. The transplant team would never approve a double donation, even if your son begged us to do it on his knees. Mom started crying then, the same fake tears she pulled out whenever she wanted something. But underneath the performance, I could hear something real for once, this thin edge of panic. Her whole plan had just shattered in front of a doctor who couldn't be bullied or guilt-tripped. Dr. Hale kept explaining in that patient voice that Vanessa's body didn't need both kidneys to survive. That 1 healthy kidney from a living donor would work just fine. That Mom had been given completely false information about what the medical requirements actually were. Mom's crying got louder, and she hung up before the surgeon even finished her sentence. Dr. Dr. Hale looked at me across the desk and apologized for my mother's behavior. She said the transplant team wanted to document everything that had happened in case my family tried to pressure me again. They were putting a flag on my file so nobody could even raise the subject of donation with me unless the whole team was present. She pulled out some forms and started writing notes while I sat there with this strange calm washing over me. For 3 weeks, my mother had made me feel like a monster for saying no. She'd convinced Vanessa I was killing her on purpose. She'd told Dad and probably half the family that I was selfish and cold. And now a surgeon with 20 years of experience had just confirmed that what Mom wanted was literally illegal. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't heartless. I was just refusing to do something no hospital in the country would ever allow. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in weeks. The professional validation felt like someone had lifted a weight off my chest I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there. Nora was waiting at my apartment with Thai takeout spread across the coffee table. She stood up when I walked in, and I told her everything. The surgeon, and the phone call, and the flag on my file. She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe for a second, and that's when I started crying. Not sad crying, just this release of all the tension I'd been holding in my shoulders for a month. Nora didn't say anything, just held on while I cried into her hair and got tears all over her shirt. We ate the food after I calmed down, and she kept reaching over to squeeze my hand like she needed to make sure I was actually okay. That night, my phone started blowing up around 11. Text after text from Mom, each one angrier than the last. She called me a liar who'd turned the doctors against her, said I'd poisoned them against Vanessa with made-up stories, accused me of wanting my sister dead so I could finally have Mom and Dad's attention, threatened to make sure everyone we knew understood what kind of person I really was. The messages kept coming, 3 and 4 in a row, swinging from rage to guilt and back again. She said Vanessa was sobbing because of me, said Dad was disappointed in the son I'd become, said I'd regret this when Vanessa died and it was all my fault. Nora took my phone out of my hand and started screenshotting every message. She made a folder on my laptop and labeled it harassment documentation, then saved each screenshot with the date and time. My hands were shaking while I watched her work. Reading Mom's words laid out in a grid of images made them feel more real somehow, the whole pattern visible all at once. Nora told me that her behavior was proving exactly why I was right to refuse. A mother who actually cared about both her kids wouldn't demand one of them wreck their health for the other. A mother who loved me wouldn't be sending messages like these. The next morning I got to work early, and Diane called me into her office before my shift even started. She closed the door and told me hospital security had reported that my mother tried to get into the dialysis unit the night before, around 9. Mom had told the guard she needed to educate the staff about family loyalty and medical ethics. The guard recognized her from the earlier incidents and refused to let her pass the lobby. She argued with him for 20 minutes before she finally left. Diane turned her monitor toward me so I could read the security report, and my stomach turned over. She told me the hospital took staff safety seriously. They were putting a flag in the security system so that if my mother tried to enter the building again, security would get an immediate alert. She asked if I was okay and whether I needed any changes to my schedule. I almost cried right there just from someone being kind to me about this whole mess. Diane told me to let her know if I needed anything and reminded me that the employee assistance program offered free counseling. I thanked her and headed to the unit to start my shift. Being surrounded by my regular patients felt more normal than anything else in my life right then. Mr. Doyle showed me photos of his new granddaughter on his phone while his machine hummed beside him. Mrs. Alvarez complained about her daughter-in-law's cooking and announced she was hosting Thanksgiving anyway. Walter talked about the fishing trip he was planning for the spring. These people had been on dialysis for 15-20 years. They had jobs and families and plans and opinions about the weather. Vanessa's situation was not the death sentence my mother kept screaming about. She just didn't want the inconvenience of 3 afternoons a week. During my lunch break, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice asked if it was me, and when I said yes, she introduced herself as Lorna, my mom's sister. I hadn't spoken to my Aunt Lorna in 8 years, not since before I got kicked out. She said she'd heard about the kidney situation from Mom and wanted to hear my side of it. Her voice sounded genuinely concerned instead of accusing, which surprised me enough that I agreed to talk. I told her everything, sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot. Started with Mom showing up 3 weeks ago demanding both kidneys. Walked through the harassment at work and at home. Explained how the surgeon had exposed Mom's lie about the transplant team approving a double donation. Lorna stayed quiet the whole time, just listening, and when I finished there was this long pause where I could hear her breathing on the other end. She finally said she wasn't surprised Mom had lied about what the doctors told her. Hearing someone from the family say that out loud hit me harder than I expected. Lorna started talking about watching Mom enable Vanessa's drinking since she was 16. She remembered Mom buying her that first bottle, remembered family dinners where Mom laughed off everyone's concern about how much her daughter was putting away. She said she always knew it would end badly, but nobody could tell Mom a single thing when it came to Vanessa. Then Lorna admitted something that made my chest go tight. She said the family had cut me out because Mom made it too uncomfortable to keep in contact with me. If anyone asked asked about me or floated the idea of inviting me to something, Mom would get so upset she'd ruin the whole event. Eventually, people stopped asking because it was easier to go along with Mom than to deal with the fallout. Lorna's voice got quiet when she said she was ashamed she'd gone along with it for the sake of peace. We talked for almost an hour, two people in two parked cars across the same city. Lorna told me about gatherings I'd missed, how Mom controlled the guest lists and steered every conversation. She said several family members were uncomfortable with Mom's current behavior, the stalking and the kidney demands, but they were all afraid to speak up. Mom had a way of punishing anyone who disagreed with her, freezing them out or making their lives miserable until they backed down. Lorna promised to run interference where she could, maybe talk to some of the relatives who were starting to question things. Before we hung up, she told me I was right to protect myself, and that what Mom was asking me to do was wrong. Hearing those words from actual family, not just Nora or my co-workers, felt like something inside me came loose. The first time anyone from my own blood had taken my side in 10 years. That evening I was making dinner with Nora when my phone rang from the building's front desk. The doorman said my mother was in the lobby asking to come up. My stomach dropped, and I told him I didn't want visitors, asked him to have her leave. I could hear Mom's voice in the background getting louder, something about her rights as a mother and needing to see her son. The doorman stayed professional and told her the resident didn't want visitors, and she'd need to leave the building. Mom started shouting loud enough that I could hear her clearly through the phone, yelling about how I was killing Vanessa, how the building staff was helping me commit murder by keeping her away from me. Nora took the phone out of my shaking hand and suggested we call the police non-emergency line to put what was happening on record. I'd never called the police on my own mother before, and it felt enormous and terrifying, but Nora pulled up the number and dialed. We explained the situation to the dispatcher, gave them the address, said we needed to document an ongoing harassment problem. An officer showed up about an hour later, after Mom was already gone. He was maybe 40, tired looking, and he sat in my living room taking notes while I explained the whole pattern, the workplace stalking, the calls to my landlord and my girlfriend, tonight's scene in the lobby. He wrote everything down in a small notebook, nodding now and then. When I finished, he said this kind of behavior often escalates, and suggested I think about getting a restraining order if it kept up. He made it sound so ordinary, so straightforward, like this was just a thing that happened to people, and there were procedures for it. After he left, Nora and I spent the rest of the night on her laptop, reading about restraining orders. We found the court forms and went through the requirements and started a list of every incident we could remember from the past 3 weeks. Nora opened a spreadsheet and we filled in dates, times, locations, what Mom had said or done each time, the hospital incidents, the texts, the calls to my work and landlord, tonight's scene in the lobby. Seeing it laid out like that, row after row of harassment, made something click in my head. This wasn't complicated family drama like I'd kept telling myself. This was a clear pattern of someone refusing to accept no and using intimidation to try to force me into compliance. The officer's matter-of-fact way of handling it had helped me see it clearly. He hadn't acted like I was overreacting or being dramatic. He treated it like exactly what it was, harassment that needed documentation and legal intervention. 2 days later, I finished my shift and headed into the parking garage. Mom was standing right next to my car. She looked terrible. Hair a mess, clothes wrinkled, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in days. I froze about 20 feet away, keys in my hand, trying to decide whether to turn around and get security. But she saw me and started talking fast, this desperate stream of words about Vanessa being her baby and how she couldn't lose her. She said she knew I was angry about the past, but Vanessa didn't deserve to suffer for old family problems. Her voice kept cracking, and she was crying real tears this time, not the faucet kind. I stayed where I was, didn't move closer, and told her calmly that Vanessa wasn't dying. She was on dialysis 3 times a week, and she could live for decades that way. I see patients do it every single shift, I said. Mom's face twisted, and she started screaming that I was heartless for comparing her daughter to strangers. She yelled that dialysis was torture, that I was sentencing Vanessa to a miserable existence when I could save her with one simple choice. Her voice bounced off the concrete walls. I told her again that I'd already offered 1 kidney, that 1 kidney would help Vanessa, but she'd rejected that. I said it plainly, that she wanted me on dialysis instead of my sister. Mom actually nodded and said yes. That's exactly what a real brother would do. Sacrifice himself completely for his sister, who never did a single thing to deserve any of this. She said Vanessa was the real victim here, that her drinking wasn't her fault because I didn't understand addiction, and that I was being selfish for putting my own health above my sister's life. A security guard named Reggie came around the corner right then. Somebody must have reported the shouting because he walked straight toward us, alert and focused. He recognized Mom immediately from the hospital alert, said her name and told her she needed to leave hospital property right now. Mom tried to argue, said she was just talking to her son, but Reggie cut her off. He said she was trespassing, and if she didn't leave immediately, he'd call the police. His voice was firm and professional, not unkind, but absolutely clear that he wasn't going to negotiate. Mom looked at me one more time with this expression like I had betrayed her, then turned and walked toward the garage exit, her shoes clicking hard against the floor. She got about 10 feet away and spun back around, her face twisted up with anger. "You'll regret this when Vanessa dies, and it's all your fault," she screamed, the sound ringing off the walls. "When she's gone, you'll have to live with knowing you could have saved her and chose yourself instead." Reggie stepped between us, his body blocking her view of me. He didn't say a word, just stood there, solid and calm, until she finally turned and left for real. I heard her car start somewhere on the lower level, and the engine fade as she drove away. Reggie walked me to my car and waited while I unlocked the door and got in. "You should think about changing up your schedule if you can," he said through the open window. "Come and go at different times, use different entrances, that kind of thing." His words made something click in my head. This wasn't awkward family drama anymore. Hospital security was worried enough about my safety to tell me to change my daily routine. I thanked him and locked my doors and sat there for a minute letting it sink in. My own mother had become enough of a threat that trained security personnel thought I needed to take precautions. I drove home on autopilot, hands tight on the wheel. When I got to my apartment, Nora was already there making dinner. She took one look at my face and asked what happened. I told her about Mom in the garage and what Reggie had said about varying my schedule. Nora set down the knife she was holding and pulled out her phone. "I found a lawyer," she said. "Victor Salazar. He does family law and harassment cases. I called him this afternoon after you texted me that your mom showed up again. I felt this wave of relief that I wasn't carrying all of this alone." Nora had already researched lawyers and made calls while I was at work. She showed me Victor's website with all the information about restraining orders and family court. I called the number right then, standing in our kitchen while she finished cooking. Victor answered on the third ring, his voice professional but not cold. I explained the basics: Mom demanding both kidneys, the harassment at work, tonight's scene in the garage. He listened without interrupting, then said he could meet me the next afternoon if I was free. He asked me to bring all my paperwork, the texts, the hospital incident reports, the police report from when she showed up at my building. "Bring anything that shows a pattern of behavior," he said. "We need to document everything." The next day, I left work early and drove to Victor's office downtown. His waiting room was small but clean. Normal office furniture, magazines on the table. A secretary checked me in, and 10 minutes later, Victor came out to get me. He was maybe 50, in a suit with no tie, and he shook my hand firmly before leading me back. I sat across from his desk and pulled out the folder Nora and I had built. All the screenshots organized by date, the hospital security reports, the police report from my building, the written statement from the transplant surgeon about the illegal double kidney request. Victor spread it all across his desk and went through it piece by piece, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. I walked him through the whole story, from Mom's first demand to last night in the garage. He asked about specific dates and times, about witnesses, about whether Mom had ever been physically violent. I told him no physical violence, just a lot of screaming and showing up where she shouldn't be. When I finished, Victor leaned back in his chair and looked at all the paper covering his desk. "You have a strong case for a restraining order," he said. "The pattern is clear. You have multiple witnesses and the workplace disruption is well documented." He explained that harassment doesn't have to mean physical threats, that stalking and repeated unwanted contact count too. Hearing a lawyer say I had a strong case made something loosen in my chest. I wasn't overreacting. This was real enough that the legal system would take it seriously. Victor walked me through the whole process step by step. We'd file a petition with the court, which would trigger a hearing date in about 2 weeks. At the hearing, I'd testify about Mom's behavior and present all the documentation. He'd help me prepare my testimony and make sure everything was organized for the judge. "Given what you've shown me, I'm confident the judge will grant the order," he said. "You have hospital security involved, police reports, workplace complaints, and a clear pattern of escalating behavior." He explained that the order would legally bar Mom from contacting me, coming to my work or home, or posting about me online. If she violated it, she could be arrested. It would last 1 year to start, and we could renew it if we needed to. I left his office feeling like I'd finally taken real action instead of just reacting to whatever Mom did next. That night, I was heating up leftovers when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" Dad's voice came through the line, tired and rough. "It's me." I froze with the microwave door still open. Dad hadn't called me in 10 years, not once since the day Mom kicked me out. "Mom told me what happened at the hospital," he said. "I know she's been out of line, but I'm calling to ask you to please reconsider, for Vanessa's sake. The family is falling apart over this." I closed the microwave and leaned against the counter, my free hand gripping the edge hard enough to hurt. "Where were you when Mom threw me out at 18? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Where were you when I lost the baby? When I worked 3 jobs to get through nursing school?" The line went quiet for a long time. I could hear Dad breathing on the other end. I could picture him in the house I grew up in, probably sitting in his recliner, avoiding Mom's eyes. "I should have stood up for you back then," he finally said. "I know I should have, but can't you let the past go now, when Vanessa's life is at stake?" I laughed, and it wasn't a happy sound. "Vanessa's life isn't at stake, Dad. She's on dialysis 3 times a week. She can live for years like that, maybe decades. I see patients do it every day in my unit." Dad made a confused noise. "But your mother said the transplant team told her both kidneys would give Vanessa the best chance. That one kidney might not be enough." enough. Mom lied, I said flatly. The surgeon called her and told her that a double kidney donation is illegal. It's not even medically possible. The hospital would never approve it, no matter what I agreed to. The silence on Dad's end was different now, heavier. She told me the doctor said that, he said slowly. She showed me paperwork and everything. I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. Dad had been manipulated too. Mom had controlled exactly what information he got, the same way she tried to control everything else. She lied to you, Dad. She lied to Vanessa. She lied to the whole family about what the doctors actually said. Dad didn't say anything for almost a minute. I heard him shifting around, maybe standing up, maybe pacing. I didn't question it, he finally admitted. I don't understand all the medical stuff, so I just trusted your mother to handle the details. That's when it hit me that Mom had been playing everyone. Vanessa thought the team had approved taking both my kidneys if I agreed. Dad thought the doctors recommended it for Vanessa's best chance. The whole family probably believed Mom's version, where I was the selfish villain refusing to save my dying sister. Nobody had checked her story because nobody imagined she'd lie about something this serious. Vanessa isn't dying, I said again. Dialysis is uncomfortable, but it works. She could live a completely normal lifespan on it. And even if she does get a transplant, it only ever needs to be one kidney. That's all anyone gets from a living donor. Mom invented the part about needing both. I explained how the whole transplant process actually works, how one healthy kidney from a living donor is usually better than two from a deceased donor because it's fresher. I told him about my patients who'd been on dialysis since the 90s, who had jobs and families and full lives. Dad listened without interrupting, and I could almost hear him processing information that contradicted everything Mom had ever told him. His voice sounded older than I remembered, worn down by years of letting her make every decision. I need to figure out what's true, he said. Then he hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, feeling strange. Dad had actually listened. He hadn't yelled or accused me or tried to guilt me into changing my mind. He'd heard the truth and admitted he needed to think. I didn't know if that meant anything long term. Dad had spent decades taking the path of least resistance, even when it meant abandoning his own son. One phone call didn't erase 10 years of silence, but maybe it was something. I put my phone down and finished heating my dinner, trying not to hope too hard that my father might actually choose me for once. The next week, I took the elevator to the 3rd floor of the medical building, where the hospital's employee assistance program had its offices. Diane had given me the name of a therapist, Dana Reyes, who worked with healthcare staff dealing with family stress. I'd been skeptical about therapy, figured it would just be someone telling me to forgive my mother and repair the relationship. But Diane promised Dana was different, that she actually understood difficult family situations and wouldn't push reconciliation. The waiting room was quiet, soft chairs, calm colors on the walls. I filled out intake paperwork asking about my family history and current stressors, checking boxes that didn't come anywhere close to explaining the actual situation. When Dana came out to get me, she was younger than I expected, maybe 40, in regular clothes instead of stiff office wear. Her handshake was warm, and she smiled like she was honestly glad to meet me. Her office had a couch and 2 chairs, a window looking out over the parking lot, a bookshelf full of psychology texts mixed in with novels. I sat in one of the chairs, and she sat across from me with a notepad. Diane told me a little about your situation, she said, but I'd rather hear it from you. What brought you here? I started talking, and once I started, I couldn't stop. The whole thing came pouring out. Mom's demand for both kidneys, Vanessa's entitlement, the 10 years of estrangement, the harassment campaign, last week's scene in the garage. Dana listened without interrupting, nodding sometimes, taking the occasional note, but mostly just paying attention. When I finished, she didn't immediately try to fix anything or hand me advice. She just said one thing that made me feel like she actually got it. It sounds like your mother has never seen you as a separate person with your own needs and rights. You've always existed in her mind as either an extension of her or a resource for your sister. Nobody had ever put it that clearly before. That was exactly what it felt like. I kept circling back to that phrase for the rest of the week, turning it over during my shifts and while I lay awake at night. Mom had never seen me as separate from her plans. I existed as either a tool to use or an obstacle to remove when I didn't cooperate. Dana asked me to think about other times the pattern showed up, and once I started looking, I saw it everywhere. When I was 12 and wanted to quit the youth soccer league I hated, Mom made me keep playing for 3 more years because she liked telling people her son was an athlete. When I wanted to go to the community college 15 minutes from home, she pushed me toward an expensive school 2 states away so she could brag about where I got in, then refused to help pay a cent when I actually enrolled. When I got my girlfriend pregnant at 18, she kicked me out, not because she was worried about me, but because a teenage son about to have a baby didn't fit the image she wanted to project to the neighbors. The miscarriage that came a few weeks later wasn't a tragedy to her. It was a convenient problem solving itself. Dana helped me see that Mom's demand for both kidneys followed the exact same blueprint. She wanted Vanessa healthy and normal again, and my body was just another resource she expected to access without my consent. The fact that taking both kidneys would destroy my health never registered because my needs had never registered. I was supposed to exist for her convenience, and anything else was selfish rebellion. Understanding the pattern didn't make it hurt less, but it made me feel less insane for refusing. I wasn't cruel or heartless like she she kept saying. I was finally treating myself like a person instead of an extension of her will. My second session with Dana was the following week, and she started by asking about the baby. I hadn't really talked about it in years. Nora knew it had happened, but I'd never gone into the details with anyone. I was 18 and my girlfriend was 17, and the pregnancy was an accident neither of us knew what to do with. I was living at home, working part-time stocking shelves, trying to figure out college. Mom's reaction was instant, white-hot rage. She screamed that I was ruining her reputation, that people would think she raised me wrong, that I was throwing my whole life away. Dad sat there staring at the carpet while she yelled. 2 days later, she told me to pack my things and get out. She didn't care where I went or how I'd survive. I slept on a friend's couch and pulled double shifts to make rent. At 12 weeks, my girlfriend started bleeding, and by the time we got to the emergency room, it was already over. The doctor told us the pregnancy wasn't viable. We sat in those plastic chairs not knowing what to say to each other, and a few weeks after that, she left, and I didn't blame her. We were kids drowning in something far too big for us. When I finally called Mom 3 days after the miscarriage, thinking maybe this would soften her, she told me it was probably for the best, since I clearly wasn't responsible enough to be a father anyway. She said even my own body must have known I wasn't ready, like it was some kind of verdict on my character. Then she hung up and didn't speak to me again for 10 years. Telling Dana all of this, I realized how much shame I'd been carrying that was never mine to carry. I'd blamed myself for being careless, for not being more careful, for somehow causing the loss through stress or doing something wrong. But I was 18 and terrified and abandoned by everyone who should have helped me. None of it was my fault. Mom's cruelty wasn't something I'd earned by being irresponsible. I'd been hauling around a decade of guilt that belonged to the people who failed me, not to my own choices. After I started therapy, I started sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks. The constant anxiety sitting on my chest loosened enough that I could take a full breath again. Nora noticed the change right away. She said I seemed less jumpy, that I didn't flinch anymore every time my phone buzzed. We were having dinner at her place when she brought it up, and the conversation drifted into something bigger. She told me she was serious about us, about building a real future together. She'd been thinking about asking me to move in even before the kidney situation started, but she hadn't wanted me to think she was only offering because I needed somewhere safe. She wanted me to know that my family's dysfunction didn't scare her off. She'd seen the worst of it now, watched Mom's harassment and Vanessa's cruelty up close, and she was still here, still choosing me. We talked for hours about what we wanted. She wanted marriage eventually, kids, a life that looked nothing like the chaos I'd grown up inside. I wanted the same things, but I'd been afraid to even hope for them after everything that happened when I was 18. Nora held my hand across the table and told me I deserved good things, that I deserved people who stayed. I cried a little, the good kind, the kind that comes from relief instead of pain. For the first time in months, something in my life was moving in the right direction. The restraining order hearing landed on a cold Tuesday morning in late October. I met Victor outside the courthouse at 8:30, my hands shaking around the folder of documentation we'd built. He walked me through what would happen, how the judge would hear both sides, how I needed to stay calm and factual no matter what Mom or her lawyer said. We pushed through the heavy doors and went through security, then found the right courtroom on the 3rd floor. Mom was already there with her lawyer sitting on a bench in the hallway. She looked put together and sympathetic, a nice dress, minimal makeup, her hair styled carefully. She'd clearly prepared to look like a worried mother instead of a stalker. Her lawyer was an older man in an expensive suit, and they had their heads close together, talking quietly. When Mom saw me, her face crumpled into sadness, like I was the one hurting her. I looked away and focused on Victor's calm presence beside me. He squeezed my shoulder and reminded me we had strong documentation and the truth on our side. But looking at her sitting there, looking so maternal and harmless, I worried the judge would see her performance instead of the reality. I worried all my evidence would look like a vindictive son blowing up a family argument instead of a harassment victim protecting himself. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wooden benches, a raised platform where the judge would sit. Victor and I took our seats at one table, while Mom and her lawyer sat at the other. A clerk called the case and the judge came in, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She reviewed the paperwork quickly and asked me to testify first. I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs and swore to tell the truth. Victor guided me through my testimony with careful questions. I described the initial demand, Mom's insistence on both kidneys despite the medical impossibility, my refusal, and the harassment that followed. I talked about the calls to my workplace claiming I was having a breakdown, the calls to my landlord saying I was unstable, the calls to Nora telling her I was a murderer. I described Mom showing up at the hospital during my shifts, her scene in the lobby, security having to escort her out over and over. I talked about finding her waiting by my car in the garage, her refusal to leave when asked, the guard who had to step in. Victor presented each piece of documentation in order, the screenshots, the call logs showing how often she contacted me, the written statements from hospital security about the trespassing, the police report from my apartment building. I watched the judge's expression shift from neutral to focused concern as the pattern came into view. She started taking notes, asking clarifying questions forms about specific dates and incidents. When Victor presented the statement from the transplant surgeon, explaining that a double kidney donation was illegal and that Mom had lied about the team's willingness to perform it, the judge's face hardened into something cold. Mom's lawyer stood up to cross-examine me, his voice smooth and sympathetic. He suggested I was inflating a normal family conflict into harassment, that my mother was simply a desperate woman trying to save her daughter's life by any means available. He implied I was being vindictive over old grievances, using the current crisis to punish my mother for past disagreements. He asked if it was true that I'd been estranged from my family for 10 years, that I'd refused to attend family events, that I had a long history of conflict with my mother. I answered honestly. Yes, we'd been estranged because Mom kicked me out at 18 and never tried to reconcile. Yes, I wasn't invited to family events, not that I refused to come. Yes, we had conflict, mostly around how she treated me compared to my sister. The lawyer tried to make it sound like I was the problem, the difficult son who manufactured family drama. But when Victor stood up for redirect, he asked me one simple question. Did I offer to donate one kidney to my sister, the legal and medically appropriate option? I said yes, I offered one kidney. Victor asked what my mother's response had been. I said she told me one wasn't enough, that I needed to give both and go on dialysis myself. The judge's expression made it clear that answer landed exactly the way Victor intended. Then the judge turned to Mom directly and asked if she had demanded both of my kidneys knowing it was illegal and would leave me on dialysis for the rest of my life. Mom's lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off and repeated the question, her voice sharp. Mom shifted in her seat, her careful composure starting to crack. She said the doctors were wrong, that she'd only been exploring every option to save her daughter, that any mother would do the same. She insisted she never meant to hurt me. She just wanted Vanessa to have the best possible chance. But her voice wavered and her eyes darted around the courtroom, and it was obvious she was lying. The judge's face stayed hard and unimpressed. She asked if Mom understood that harassing me at my workplace could cost me my job. Mom said she was just trying to make me understand how serious the situation was. The judge asked if showing up at my home after being told to stay away seemed like reasonable behavior. Mom's face flushed and she started crying, but these were different tears than usual. These were real tears of panic, as she realized her manipulation wasn't working on someone with actual authority. The judge granted the restraining order for 1 year. She stated clearly that Mom was prohibited from contacting me directly or through anyone else, from coming to my workplace or home, from posting about me on social media, or making any public statements about me. Any violation would result in immediate arrest and possible jail time. Mom's face crumpled completely and she started crying harder, reaching for her lawyer's arm like she needed something to hold on to. Her lawyer tried to argue for a shorter duration or less restrictive terms, but the judge wasn't moved. She said the documented pattern of harassment was serious and persistent, that I had a right to feel safe at work and at home, and that Mom's behavior had crossed clear legal lines regardless of her claimed motives. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and it was over. I had legal protection. My mother couldn't contact me anymore without facing criminal consequences. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt relief and sadness mixing together in my chest until I couldn't tell which one was stronger. Victor was satisfied, saying it was exactly what we'd hoped for. Nora was waiting outside and hugged me tight, telling me I did great, that it was over now. But standing there on the steps with the paperwork in my hands, all I could think was that I'd just gotten a court order against my own mother. I'd protected myself legally, and I knew it was necessary, but that didn't make it feel good. It felt heavy and sad, like something permanent had broken that could never be put back. My mother would never change. She would never apologize or see me as a person instead of a resource. The restraining order made that reality official and final. Nora took me to dinner that night to celebrate. A nice place downtown with good wine and dim lighting. She kept trying to make me smile, talking about how brave I was, how proud she was of me for standing up for myself. I appreciated what she was doing, but mostly, I just felt hollow. The adrenaline from the hearing had drained out and left me exhausted. I picked at my food and drank my wine and tried to feel happy about having legal protection, and I couldn't get there. Nora noticed and stopped pushing. She reached across the table and held my hand and told me it was okay to not be okay, that I didn't have to pretend everything was fine just because I'd won in court. She understood that protecting yourself from family doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like a loss. We finished dinner quietly and went back to her place, and I fell asleep on her couch before 9, too tired to even make it to the bedroom. 2 days after the hearing, Lorna called while I was getting ready for my shift. Her voice was strained but determined when she told me Dad had confronted Mom about the lies. He'd asked to see the medical records himself and discovered that everything Mom had been telling the family was false. The transplant team never said both kidneys would give Vanessa a better chance. The doctors never told her one kidney wouldn't be enough. She'd invented all of it to manipulate everyone into pressuring me. Dad was furious when he realized the truth, and according to Lorna, they'd had the biggest fight of their marriage. He packed a bag that same night and showed up at Lorna's door, asking if he could stay in her guest room while he figured things out. She said she'd never seen him so angry and so defeated at the same time, like he was finally seeing 30 years of marriage clearly and hating what he saw. She told me several relatives had been calling calling her asking what really happened, because Mom's version kept changing and nothing added up anymore. My cousin wanted to know why I'd really gotten kicked out at 18. An uncle was asking about the miscarriage and whether Mom had actually been supportive like she'd always claimed. The narrative Mom had controlled for so long was finally cracking, and people were reaching out to each other trying to piece together the truth. I listened to all of it while buttoning my scrubs and felt something strange in my chest. Not quite relief, not quite sadness, just the odd sensation of watching something inevitable finally happen. That afternoon, between patients, I checked my phone and found a Facebook message from my cousin Megan. We'd been close as kids, spent whole summers together before the family split. Her message was long and awkward, full of apologies for believing Mom's stories about me being unstable and selfish. She wrote that she'd always felt uncomfortable about how Mom talked about me, but she never knew how to push back without starting a war. She said she was sorry for not reaching out sooner and asked if maybe we could get coffee sometime. No pressure. She'd understand if I said no. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back that yes, I'd like that. We made plans for the following week at a coffee shop near the hospital. The next morning, Diane called me into her office before rounds. I figured there was a problem with one of my patients, but she was smiling when I sat down. She told me the hospital administration wanted to recognize how I'd handled the situation with my mother. They were giving me a commendation for maintaining patient care standards during a difficult personal time. Diane said she'd written a letter to the board explaining how I'd never let the harassment affect my work, how I'd kept providing excellent care even while Mom was showing up at the hospital making scenes. The commendation would go in my file and come with a small bonus. I thanked her, but honestly didn't know how to feel about it. Getting recognized for surviving my mother's harassment was strange and validating at the same time. The coffee with Megan happened on my day off. I got there early and sat by the window, more nervous than I'd expected. When Megan walked in, she looked different from her photos. Older, but also tired, like life had worn her down some. We hugged awkwardly and ordered drinks and sat across from each other, not quite sure how to start. Megan jumped in first, apologizing again for the years of exclusion. She said she'd always questioned Mom's version of events, but it was easier to go along than to make waves. The gatherings I wasn't invited to, she'd asked about me a few times, but Mom would get upset and Dad would change the subject, and eventually she stopped asking. She said she felt guilty about that now, about choosing comfort over doing the right thing. We talked for 2 hours, catching up on lost years, and it felt good, even though it was sad. All that time, we could have known each other and didn't, because Mom controlled the story and everyone let her. Before Megan left, she told me Vanessa was furious about the restraining order. She was blaming me for tearing the family apart, telling anyone who'd listen that I was vindictive and cruel. She was still going to dialysis 3 times a week and complaining non-stop about how unfair her life was. Megan said she'd been posting on Facebook about ungrateful siblings who abandoned family in their time of need, obvious subtweets about me, even though she couldn't name me directly because of the order. But medically, she was fine, stable, not in any immediate danger, just inconvenienced and angry that her little brother wouldn't sacrifice himself to make her life easier. Megan said it plainly, without trying to soften it, and I appreciated her honesty. She also told me the transplant team was actively searching for a donor through the National Registry. Vanessa might get matched with a deceased donor within the next year, maybe sooner, depending on how the list moved. This confirmed what I already knew from working in the field, but hearing it from Megan made it more real. Somehow Vanessa would probably get her kidney eventually, just not from me, not at the cost of my own health and future. That week in therapy, Dana and I worked on the complicated feelings that came with protecting myself while watching family relationships fall apart. I told her about Dad staying with Lorna, about Megan reaching out, about the strange mix of relief and guilt I felt about all of it. Dana helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for fixing dysfunction I didn't create, that Mom's lies had been destroying the family long before I set a single boundary. Healing doesn't require reconciliation with people who hurt you, she said. Sometimes healing means accepting that some relationships are too damaged to repair, and that's okay. You can move forward anyway. You can build a life without needing their approval or forgiveness. She asked if I felt guilty about the restraining order, and I admitted yes, sometimes. Dana nodded and said that was normal, but reminded me that guilt doesn't mean I made the wrong choice. It just means I'm human, and family is complicated, even when it's unhealthy. 3 weeks after the hearing, Victor called to tell me Dad had reached out, asking if I'd be willing to meet with him alone. Just the 2 of us. No Mom, no Vanessa. Victor said I didn't have to agree to anything, but if I wanted to meet, he advised doing it somewhere public and reminded me I could leave any time if I felt uncomfortable. I thought about it for a day before telling Victor yes, I'd meet Dad. We arranged it for the following Saturday at a coffee shop downtown, neutral ground where neither of us had any history. Saturday morning, I got there 15 minutes early and sat at a corner table where I could see the door. My stomach was tight and my hands were cold despite the warm cup I was holding. Dad walked in exactly on time, looking older than I remembered. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, his shoulders slumped like he was carrying weight he couldn't set down. He saw me and walked over slowly, sitting down across from me without trying to hug me or even shake my hand. We looked at each other for a long moment before he started talking. He apologized apologized for not protecting me when I was young, said he chose peace over standing up for what was right, and he was ashamed of it now. He admitted he believed Mom's lies about the kidney situation because he didn't understand the medical side and trusted her to handle the details. He said he was sorry for the decade of silence, for not reaching out after I got kicked out, for not being there when I lost the baby, for missing 10 years of my life because it was easier than confronting his wife. I listened to his words settle into the space between us, watched him stare at his coffee like it might hand him answers he didn't have. The apology felt real in a way that hurt more than if it had been fake, because it meant he knew exactly what he'd done and chose it anyway, year after year. He waited for me to say something, to tell him it was okay, or that I forgave him, but I couldn't make those words come out. Forgiveness felt too big, too permanent for a moment when everything was still raw. I took a breath and told him the truth, that words were easy, and he'd had a decade to reach out before Vanessa needed a kidney. He flinched, but he didn't argue, just nodded and kept his eyes down. I said I was willing to try building something if he was serious about changing, not just feeling guilty right now, but actually committed to being different. We could meet once a month, get coffee, see if trust could grow back slowly. He looked up then, something like relief crossing his face, and agreed immediately. We picked the third Saturday of every month. Same coffee shop, same time. A structure that felt manageable and safe. That evening, Nora and I sat on my couch, scrolling through apartment listings on her laptop, the glow of the screen lighting up her face as she clicked through photos of empty rooms. We'd been talking about moving in together for a few weeks, testing the idea carefully, but tonight it felt real and possible instead of frightening. She showed me a 2-bedroom with big windows, and I leaned against her shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of her, thinking about how different this was from my family. With Nora, I got to choose, got to build something new instead of trying to fix something that had been broken from the start. She asked if I wanted the place with the windows, and I said yes, let's go see it this weekend. The idea of a home that was ours, not mine or hers, but ours together, felt important in a way I couldn't quite put into words. It was choosing the family I wanted instead of being stuck with the one I was born into. At my next session 3 days later, I told Dana about Dad's apology and our monthly coffee plan. She listened with that focused attention she always gave, then pointed out how much had changed in just 2 months since the day I first called the transplant team. I'd set boundaries with Mom, gotten legal protection, started rebuilding with Dad and other relatives, and now I was planning a future with someone who actually supported me. Dana said I'd grown from someone panicked and defensive into someone who protected himself while staying open to healthy connections. I hadn't thought about it that way, hadn't even noticed the changes happening, because I'd been too busy just surviving each day. But sitting there in her office with the afternoon light coming through the blinds, I realized she was right. 2 months ago, I was terrified and alone. Now I had Nora and Victor and Diane and even Dad trying to be better. Not everything was fixed, probably never would be, but I wasn't drowning anymore. The following week, Lorna called to invite me to a small family dinner at her house. She was inviting Dad, my cousin, and a few other relatives who wanted to reconnect with me. Mom and Vanessa wouldn't be there, she promised, and I could leave anytime it felt wrong. I almost said no because family gatherings had been painful for so long, but something in Lorna's voice made me think this could be different. I agreed, and she sounded genuinely happy. Told me to come Saturday at 6 and not to bring anything but myself. When I got there, the house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic, and Lorna hugged me at the door like I was someone precious she hadn't seen in years. Dad was already there in the living room looking nervous, and my cousin came over right away to hug me too. There were 6 of us, relatives I barely remembered but who remembered me, and it was awkward at first, everyone too polite and careful. But then Lorna served dinner and people started talking, and slowly the stiffness melted into something almost normal. During the meal, my aunt told a story about a Christmas when I was 12, and Mom made me sit at the kids' table while Vanessa sat with the adults, even though we were only 4 years apart. She said she remembered feeling uncomfortable about it but stayed quiet because confronting Mom always meant a huge fight. My cousin admitted she once watched Mom hand Vanessa a stack of cash for school while telling me to figure my own situation out, and she'd felt sick about it but didn't know what to say. One by one, people shared moments they'd witnessed Mom treating me unfairly, times they knew it was wrong and chose peace over speaking up. Each story landed heavy in my chest, proof that I hadn't imagined it, hadn't been too sensitive like Mom always said. Other people saw it too, saw the unfairness and the cruelty, and chose to look away because it was easier. Part of me wanted to be angry at them for their silence, for all the years they could have said something and didn't. But mostly I just felt sad for the kid I used to be, trying so hard to be good enough while everyone watched and said nothing. I thanked them for their honesty now, even though it came too late to change anything. Near the end of dinner, my cousin mentioned, almost casually, that Vanessa had finally been matched with a deceased donor and was scheduled for transplant surgery in 3 weeks. The words hit me strange, this mix of relief and something I couldn't name. Relief because she'd get the kidney she needed without it coming from me, without me having to sacrifice my health or my future. Relief because maybe this would finally end the crisis that had swallowed my whole life for months. But also this hollow feeling, knowing our relationship was damaged beyond repair, that even getting what she wanted wouldn't change how she'd treated me. I told my cousin I hoped the surgery went well, and I meant it, because whatever else was true, I didn't want Vanessa to die or suffer. I just didn't want to be the one who had to save her at the cost of myself. Dad reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, a small gesture that felt bigger than it was. The next week at work, Diane called me into her office again and told me the hospital administration was developing new protocols for handling family harassment of staff. My case had shown them gaps in their protection systems, and they were building better procedures partly because of what I'd gone through. The hospital would now have clearer policies about banning family members from the premises, faster response systems for staff reporting harassment, mandatory documentation when relatives became threatening. Diane said my experience was going to help protect other healthcare workers who might face the same thing someday, and that mattered. I sat there taking it in, thinking about how something good might actually come out of all the awful stuff with Mom. Maybe another nurse wouldn't have to deal with a parent stalking them at work. Maybe security would respond faster, or maybe someone would get help before things got as bad as they did for me. It didn't fix what happened, but it gave the whole mess some kind of meaning. 3 weeks later, Lorna called to tell me Vanessa's transplant surgery had happened that morning and gone well. The new kidney was working properly, filtering her blood the way it should, and the doctor said she'd be off dialysis completely within a few months once she finished recovering. She'd need anti-rejection medication for the rest of her life, but that was manageable, normal for transplant patients. I felt a wave of relief hearing the surgery succeeded, because despite everything, I didn't actually want my sister to die. I wanted her to live and be healthy, just not at the cost of my own health. Lorna said Vanessa was already complaining about the hospital food and the uncomfortable bed, which sounded exactly like her. She didn't suggest I visit, and I didn't offer, both of us understanding that some relationships are too broken to fix, even when the medical crisis finally resolves. Dad called me that evening to tell me he'd visited Vanessa at the hospital, but Mom had been there too, so he'd kept the visit short. He said he was holding the separation, even though Mom kept calling him crying and begging him to come home. I asked if he was okay, and he said yes, that staying at Lorna's was giving him space to think clearly for the first time in years. He realized how much of his life he'd spent managing Mom's emotions and enabling her worst behavior, and he couldn't go back to that, even though it was hard and lonely sometimes. I told him I was proud of him for holding his boundary, and he got quiet, then said that meant more than I probably knew. We talked for a while about nothing important, just normal conversation about his day and mine, and it felt like maybe we were building something real after all these years of nothing. Nora and I signed the lease on a 2-bedroom across town, far enough from my old place that it felt like a real escape. The walls were plain white when we moved in, boring and neutral like every rental I'd ever seen. We spent the first weekend painting the bedroom a soft green I picked from a dozen samples, and Nora chose a warm gray for the living room because she said it would make the space feel bigger. We arranged the furniture in ways that made sense for how we actually lived, instead of how someone else thought we should. The couch went under the window so we could look outside while we watched TV, and we put the kitchen table by the balcony door where the morning light came in. Every choice felt intentional and ours, not something inherited or forced on us by family or old history. I hung photos of me and Nora on the walls, pictures from trips we'd taken and dinners we'd shared, a visual record of the life we were building together. No family photos went up. No pictures of people who'd spent years pretending I didn't exist. This apartment was genuinely ours, a place where nobody could show up demanding things or making me feel guilty for protecting myself. 3 months passed after the restraining order, and I realized one morning that I'd slept through the entire night without waking up anxious. My performance reviews at work were strong, with Diane noting that I'd kept up excellent patient care even through personal stress. Nora and I fell into comfortable routines, cooking dinner most nights, talking about our days without the constant shadow of family drama hanging over everything. I kept reconnecting with cousins and extended relatives who reached out after learning the truth about what Mom had demanded. We met for coffee or lunch, awkward at first, but easier each time as we built new relationships based on honesty instead of Mom's carefully managed version of me. My cousin invited me to her daughter's birthday party, the first family event I'd attended in over a decade. I brought a gift and stayed for 2 hours, talking with relatives who apologized for believing Mom's lies and excluding me for so long. The conversations felt real, people actually listening when I spoke instead of waiting for their turn. I wasn't holding my breath for the next crisis or the next harassment incident, and that calm felt strange after months of constant vigilance. Dad and I kept meeting for coffee on the 3rd Saturday of every month at the same cafe downtown where we could talk without interruption. He showed up on time every single month, which might sound like nothing, but meant everything given his history of choosing Mom's comfort over my well-being. He told me he'd started his own therapy to work on his codependency, learning to recognize how he'd enabled Mom for decades. We talked about real things during those mornings, not surface-level small talk, but honest conversation about his regrets and my life. He admitted he should have protected me when I was young, should have stood up to Mom when she threw me out, should have reached out during the 10 years of silence. I didn't forgive him completely, because words are easier than changed behavior, but I appreciated his honesty and his consistency. Our relationship would never be what it could have been if he'd been a better father father from the start, but it was becoming something real and honest instead of the fantasy I'd wished for as a kid. He asked about my life with genuine interest, remembered details from our previous conversations, and respected my boundaries when I said I didn't want to talk about Mom or Vanessa. I sat in the apartment Nora and I had made together, looking at the green bedroom walls and the photos of our life on the shelves, and realized something had shifted inside me. I didn't need Mom's approval to know I'd made the right choice protecting my health and refusing an illegal demand. I didn't need Vanessa's gratitude or her admission that her expectations had been completely unreasonable. I'd built a support system out of Nora and Diane and Dana and Victor and the relatives who respected my boundaries and treated me like a person instead of a resource. I'd secured legal protection and documented everything carefully in case Mom ever tried anything again. I'd created a life where I was valued and respected, where my needs mattered and my voice was heard. Some family relationships ended for good, and I was genuinely okay with that because they'd been toxic and one-sided from the very beginning. Other relationships turned into something healthier, built on honesty and mutual respect, instead of obligation and guilt. Dad was trying to change, and I was giving him the space to prove it was real. Extended family were reaching out and rebuilding the connections they'd let Mom destroy. I finally chose myself after 28 years of trying to earn approval from people who were never going to give it, and that choice felt right in a way nothing else ever had.